Stop right there. Turn around, hands behind your back, now.
For what charge, officer? Say it on camera.
Disorderly conduct, resisting.
I haven't raised my voice, you have. This is unlawful.
Last warning, turn around.
Touch me without cause, and you just sued your city.
The 4K resolution security cameras mounted above the bronze entrance of the Sterling Heights Tower didn't blink, didn't judge, and didn't lie. They simply recorded the crisp Chicago morning light reflecting off the polished granite pillars, capturing the moment a career ended before it had even truly begun. Officer Kyle Miller, sitting in his patrol cruiser with the engine idling, had absolutely no idea that the man he was eyeing on the sidewalk, a man adjusting the cuffs of a bespoke Italian suit, was not a loiterer, not a vagrant, and certainly not a criminal. He was Marcus Thorne, the 54-year-old managing partner of Thorne, Gentry & Associates, and he was currently negotiating a merger worth $300 million through his earpiece. But Officer Miller didn't see a legal titan. He didn't see the hand-stitched leather of the briefcase or the confident posture of a man who owned the building's penthouse floor. He saw a black man standing still on a corner in a high-end financial district where he felt he didn't belong. And that assumption was about to cost the city of Chicago nearly $3 million. Before we unravel this infuriating yet vindicating sequence of events, I need you to take a second. Scroll down and leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from today. Whether you're in the States, over in Europe, or anywhere else, I want to know who's watching. And if you believe that a badge should stand for protection, not persecution, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss a single second of this breakdown. Marcus Thorne was a man who appreciated precision. At 54, his hair was graying at the temples, lending him an air of distinguished authority that usually commanded respect in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. He had spent 25 years building his firm from a small civil rights practice into a corporate litigation powerhouse. He was known for his intellect, his patience, and his absolute refusal to suffer fools. That Tuesday morning, Marcus had stopped just outside the revolving doors of his office building to finish a sensitive call with a client in London. The signal was better outside, and the morning air helped clear his head before the marathon meetings scheduled for the day. He checked his watch, a vintage timepiece worth more than Officer Miller's annual salary, and nodded as his client finished a sentence. Officer Miller, 32 years old, and only 4 years on the force, was watching from across the intersection. He was bored. The morning shift in the financial district was usually quiet, mostly directing traffic or shooing away the occasional panhandler. But Miller was the type of officer who went looking for trouble when none existed. He had been reprimanded twice before for aggressive stops, but his union rep had smoothed things over, chalking it up to proactive policing. Miller saw Marcus standing there pacing slightly, talking to himself as it appeared from the car since the earpiece was discreet. To Miller, this wasn't a businessman closing a deal. It was a suspicious individual casing the building or soliciting. The bias in Miller's mind filled in the blanks that his eyes couldn't see. Miller put the cruiser in drive and slowly rolled across the intersection, pulling up to the curb with an aggressive lurch. He didn't turn on his lights, but he parked in a no-stopping zone directly in front of Marcus, blocking the pedestrian path. Marcus glanced at the car, annoyed by the intrusion but unconcerned. He assumed the officer was dealing with a traffic issue. He turned his back slightly to shield the microphone from the engine noise and continued his conversation. "Yes, Charles, the indemnity clause is non-negotiable. We went over this." That small turn, that dismissal, triggered something in Officer Miller. He wasn't used to being ignored. In his mind, when a police car pulls up, suspects should look nervous. They should pay attention. Ignoring him was a sign of guilt or worse, disrespect. Miller threw the patrol car into park and opened his door. He adjusted his belt, hitched up his pants, and stepped onto the sidewalk. He didn't approach with a question. He approached with a command. "Hey you, off the phone." Marcus Thorne held up a single finger signaling 1 minute and continued listening to his client. It was a universal gesture of polite delay used by busy people everywhere. But for Officer Kyle Miller, it was an act of defiance. He walked briskly around the front of his cruiser, his hand resting instinctively near his holster, not drawing but intimating force. He closed the distance until he was standing just 3 feet from Marcus invading his personal space. "I said get off the phone." Miller barked, his voice loud enough to turn heads of people entering the building. "Now!" Marcus sighed, a sound of deep, weary frustration. He tapped his earpiece. "Charles, I'm going to have to call you back. I have a situation here. Yes, 5 minutes." He tapped the device off and slowly turned to face the officer. His face was calm, his expression unreadable. He looked at Miller over the rim of his glasses, analyzing the officer like he would a hostile witness during a deposition. "Can I help you, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, deep, and devoid of fear. "I need to see some ID," Miller demanded, extending his hand. "Right now." Marcus didn't move. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't apologize. He stood his ground, planting his feet shoulder-width apart. "Officer, before I produce anything, I'm going to need you to articulate the reasonable suspicion you have that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. As you know, under Terry v. Ohio, you cannot detain me or demand identification without specific articulable facts." Miller blinked. He hadn't expected a law lecture. He expected nervousness. He expected compliance. The legal jargon flew over his head, but the tone of authority stung his ego. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Miller sneered. "I'm conducting an investigation. You're loitering in front of a private business and acting suspiciously." "Loitering?" Marcus repeated, a dry chuckle escaping his lips. "I'm standing on a public sidewalk. And as for private business, this is the Sterling Heights Tower. I am the managing partner of Thorne Gentry and Associates. My office is on the 42nd floor. I am not loitering. I am arriving at my place of employment." "Yeah, sure," Miller scoffed, looking Marcus up and down. Despite the suit, Miller's bias wouldn't let him see the truth. In his eyes, Marcus was lying. Maybe he was a courier, maybe a security guard in a suit, or maybe just a con man. "You got proof of that? Let's see the ID." "I am under no obligation to provide identification for a consensual encounter, and since you have no reasonable suspicion of a crime, this is a consensual encounter," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" "You're not going anywhere." Miller stepped closer, his chest puffing out. "You're failing to identify. That's obstruction." "That is incorrect." Marcus corrected him, his mind already cataloging the violations. "Failure to identify is only an offense if I have been lawfully arrested or detained for a valid crime. You have neither. You have a hunch and a bad one. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting." Marcus turned to walk toward the revolving doors. It was a calculated move. He knew his rights, and he knew that walking away from a consensual encounter was perfectly legal. But he also knew that men like Officer Miller rarely cared about what was legal when they felt disrespected. "I didn't say you could leave," Miller shouted. He lunged forward not to block Marcus, but to grab him. He was escalating a non-situation into a constitutional crisis because his authority had been challenged. Marcus stopped just short of the glass doors. He turned back, his eyes narrowing. "Officer, I am going to give you one chance to get back in your car and drive away. If you touch me, if you detain me without cause, you will be initiating a chain of events that will end your career. I am not the man you want to do this to." Miller's face turned red. "Is that a threat?" "It's a legal advisory," Marcus replied. The confrontation spilled into the grand lobby of the Sterling Heights Tower. Marcus walked through the revolving doors, and Officer Miller, fueled by adrenaline and poor judgment, followed him right inside. The lobby was a cavernous space of marble floors, high ceilings, and the quiet hum of corporate commerce. The sudden intrusion of a shouting police officer shattered the atmosphere instantly. "Stop right there," Miller's voice echoed off the marble walls. "Turn around." Marcus stopped near the security desk. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stopped and turned to face the officer again. By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of the front desk staff, several delivery personnel, and a group of junior associates waiting for the elevator. Robert, the head of building security, a 60-year-old retired Marine who had known Marcus for 15 years, stepped out from behind the console. He saw Marcus Thorne, the building's most prestigious tenant, being shouted at by a young cop who looked like he was about to lose control. "Officer, hold on," Robert said, raising his hands in a placating gesture and moving between Marcus and Miller. "There's a misunderstanding here. This is Mr. Thorne. He works here. He runs the law firm upstairs." Miller didn't even look at Robert. His tunnel vision was absolute. He saw the security guard as an interference, not a resource. "Back off, rent-a-cop," Miller snapped, pointing a finger in Robert's face. "Do not interfere with a police investigation or I will hook you up too. Step back." Robert froze, shocked by the aggression. He looked at Marcus with wide eyes. Marcus gave him a barely perceptible nod, a silent instruction. "Stand down. Let him dig his grave." "I'm warning you," Miller said, turning his focus back to Marcus. "You're making this worse for yourself. You walked away from me. You refused a lawful order." "I refused an unlawful order," Marcus corrected, his voice projecting clearly so that the gathering crowd could hear. "And now you are trespassing on private property to harass a tenant. Officer, look around you. Look at where you are. Does this look like the scene of a crime? Or does it look like a man going to work being harassed by a police officer who can't admit he made a mistake? Put your hands behind your back." Miller unclipped his handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rattle sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet lobby. "For what charge?" Marcus asked, not moving his hands. "I want you to say it for the cameras. There are 3 security cameras pointed at us right now, plus the witnesses. State the charge." "Disorderly conduct and resisting arrest," Miller improvised, grasping for anything that would stick. "Resisting arrest requires a lawful underlying arrest," Marcus said calmly. "And disorderly conduct requires a breach of the peace. I haven't raised my voice. You have. I haven't threatened anyone. You have. You are the only one being disorderly here, officer." Miller had had enough of the talking. He didn't care about the logic. He only cared about the compliance. He stepped forward and grabbed Marcus's left wrist, twisting it sharply behind his back. The force was unnecessary and excessive. Marcus winced slightly, but didn't fight back. He knew that any physical resistance, no matter how justified, would be used to justify a beatdown. He went limp, allowing the officer to manipulate his arms. "Stop resisting," Miller yelled for the benefit of the audience, despite the fact that Marcus was standing perfectly still. "I am not resisting," Marcus stated clearly. "I am complying under duress. Robert, take note of the time. 9:14 a.m. Unlawful arrest initiated." The sight of Marcus Thorne, a man who had dined with governors and argued before the Supreme Court being manhandled in the lobby of his own building, was surreal. The atrium, usually a place of polite nods and hushed conversations, had transformed into a theater of the absurd. A young female associate from Marcus's firm who had just entered the building with her morning coffee dropped her cup. It shattered coffee splashing across the pristine floor, but no one looked down. All eyes were on the officer forcing Marcus's wrists together. Officer Miller cinched the handcuffs tight. Too tight. The metal bit into Marcus's wrists, pinching the skin. "You're under arrest." Miller panted, the adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. He spun Marcus around so he was facing the elevator bank, pushing him forward. "You are making a mistake that you will be paying for the rest of your life," Marcus said quietly. He wasn't speaking to threaten. He was stating a fact with the certainty of gravity. "Loosen these cuffs. You are cutting off circulation." "They're fine," Miller grunted. "Stop complaining." 2 people in the crowd had their phones out. One was a courier. The other was a well-dressed man in a suit, likely a client visiting another firm. They were recording everything. Miller noticed them but was too committed to stop. He felt the eyes of the crowd, the judgment, and it only made him more defensive. He needed to get this suspect out of here and into the car where he could control the narrative. "Walk!" Miller shoved Marcus toward the door. Marcus walked. He kept his head high. He didn't look at the floor. He made eye contact with his employees as he was marched past them. He saw the horror in their eyes, the fear. He winked at the young associate who had dropped her coffee. It was a moment of supreme grace under pressure. "I'm okay," the wink said. "Watch this." Inside his mind, however, Marcus was not calm. He was furious. A cold, calculating rage was building in his chest. He was mentally drafting the ex parte motion he would file. He was listing the Fourth Amendment violations, the 14th Amendment equal protection claims, the excessive force charges the state law claims for false imprisonment, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was calculating the billable hours this officer was wasting. As they exited the building, the cool air hit Marcus's face. The officer marched him to the patrol car, pushed his head down an unnecessary TV cop cliché, and shoved him into the cramped back seat. The hard plastic seat was a stark contrast to the ergonomic leather chair waiting for him upstairs. The car smelled of stale sweat and sanitizer. Miller slammed the door shut, sealing Marcus inside. The officer walked around the car, puffing out his cheeks, trying to regulate his breathing. He looked around at the people on the sidewalk who had stopped to watch. "Nothing to see here, keep moving," he shouted, trying to reassert command over a situation that had already spiraled out of his control. Inside the car, Marcus shifted his wrists, trying to find a position that didn't send shooting pains up his arms. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't yell. He didn't bang on the glass. He simply waited. He knew the ride to the precinct would be short, but the legal journey for Officer Miller was going to be long and excruciating. The drive to the 4th Precinct took 15 minutes. For the entirety of the ride, Officer Miller tried to goad Marcus into speaking. He wanted an admission, an apology, something to justify the knot forming in his stomach. "You know, if you had just shown me your ID, none of this would have happened," Miller said, watching Marcus in the rearview mirror. "You guys always have to make it difficult. Always have to be the victim." Marcus said nothing. He stared out the window at the passing city, his face a mask of stone. He was exercising his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, but more than that, he was refusing to give Miller the satisfaction of an interaction. His silence was a weapon. It made Miller nervous. It made him fill the dead air with more justifications, more muttered comments that were being recorded by the internal dash camera. "Silence, huh? That's fine. You can tell it to the judge." Miller scoffed. "Oh, I will." Marcus thought, "I most certainly will." When they arrived at the station, Miller hauled Marcus out of the car and paraded him into the booking area. It was a busy morning. Phones were ringing, officers were typing reports, and the smell of old coffee hung heavy in the air. Miller brought Marcus to the intake desk where Sergeant Kowalski was on duty. Kowalski was a 58-year-old veteran. He had seen everything in his 30 years on the force. He had a sixth sense for bad arrests, and as soon as he saw the well-tailored suit, the silk tie, and the expensive shoes, his radar went off. He looked at Miller, then at Marcus. "What do we have here, Miller?" Kowalski asked, his voice gravelly. "Disorderly conduct resisting failure to identify." Miller recited, sounding less confident than he had on the street. "Guy wouldn't listen, caused a scene." Kowalski sighed and looked at Marcus. "Name?" Marcus remained silent. He looked at Kowalski, then looked down at his cuffed hands. "I need to process him," Miller said. "He's refusing to speak." "Uncuff him," Kowalski ordered. "I'm not booking a guy in a $3,000 suit and cuffs for disorderly unless he's swinging at me." Miller hesitated, then unlocked the cuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists, revealing deep red indentations where the metal had dug in. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. "Whoa, watch it!" Miller flinched, hand going to his belt. Marcus moved slowly, deliberately. He pulled out his slim leather wallet and placed it on the counter. He opened it and slid 2 cards across the Formica surface toward Sergeant Kowalski. The first was his driver's license. The second was his platinum member card for the State Bar Association, identifying him as a senior member. But underneath that was another card, an access badge for the federal courthouse with Attorney of Record stamped on it. Kowalski picked up the license. Marcus Thorne. He paused. The name sounded familiar. Then he looked at the bar card. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes widening in recognition. He remembered seeing Marcus on the news just last month announcing a massive settlement against a pharmaceutical company. "You're the Marcus Thorne?" Kowalski asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I am." Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and icy. "And I would like to know the badge number of this officer who has just arrested the managing partner of Thorne Gentry and Associates for entering his own office building." The room seemed to go quiet. Kowalski looked at Miller. Miller looked confused. What's he talking about?" "Miller," Kowalski said, closing his eyes and rubbing his temples. "You just arrested one of the biggest lawyers in Chicago. Please tell me you have something better than, 'He wouldn't show me his ID.'" Miller's face went pale. He was acting suspicious. He was loitering." "I was on a conference call," Marcus interjected smoothly, "standing on the sidewalk." "Now, Sergeant, I want to speak to your watch commander, immediately." Captain Frank Reynolds was 2 years away from retirement. He wanted quiet days, easy paperwork, and no scandals. When Sergeant Kowalski knocked on his door and told him that one of his officers had arrested Marcus Thorne Reynolds, felt a physical pain in his chest. He knew Thorne. He had testified in a case where Thorne had cross-examined him 5 years ago. Thorne was brilliant, ruthless, and fair unless you crossed him. Reynolds walked into the holding area, buttoning his uniform jacket, trying to look authoritative despite the sinking feeling in his gut. Marcus was sitting on a metal bench, not in a cell, holding an ice pack to his wrist that Kowalski had provided. "Mr. Thorne," Reynolds said, extending a hand. "I'm Captain Reynolds. We've met." Marcus didn't stand. He didn't shake the hand. He just looked at it until Reynolds awkwardly lowered it. "Captain, I remember. You were the supervising officer in the State v. Henderson case." "I was." Reynolds nodded. "Look, Mr. Thorne, I've been briefed by Sergeant Kowalski. It seems there's been a significant misunderstanding. Officer Miller is young, he's zealous, he misread the situation." "He didn't misread the situation," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "He profiled me. He violated my Fourth Amendment rights. He committed battery, and he falsely imprisoned me. That's not a misunderstanding, Captain. That's a lawsuit." "I understand you're upset," Reynolds said, trying to use his best de-escalation voice. "And we want to make this right. We're going to release you immediately. No charges filed. The arrest record will be expunged as if it never happened. You can walk out of here right now." Reynolds gestured to the door as if he were offering a gift. Marcus stood up slowly. "You think I'm just going to walk out?" He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Captain, if I walk out now without documentation, you'll bury this. You'll give Miller a slap on the wrist, maybe a day of retraining, and he'll be back on the street next week to do this to some kid who doesn't have a law degree and a 7-figure income. No." "What do you want, Mr. Thorne?" Reynolds asked, sensing the walls closing in. "I want the incident report." Marcus counted on his fingers. "I want the arrest report. I want digital copies of the body camera footage and the dash cam footage preserved immediately. I want the name of Miller's training officer, and I am not leaving until I have a signed copy of my release form stating clearly that the detention was unfounded. I want it in writing, Captain, now." Reynolds sighed. He knew he had no leverage. "It'll take an hour to get the paperwork together." "I'll wait," Marcus said, sitting back down. "I bill at $200 an hour, but for you I'll wait for free. Because every minute I sit here is another zero on the check the city is going to write me." Reynolds looked at Miller, who was standing in the corner looking like a child who had just realized he broke a priceless vase. "Miller, my office. Now." The lawsuit, Thorne v. City of Chicago et al., was filed 72 hours later. It was a masterpiece of legal drafting, 28 pages of scorching prose that dismantled the police department's procedures. Marcus didn't just sue for himself. He sued for the pattern of practice that allowed officers like Miller to operate with impunity. The damages sought were $2.8 million, a calculated number high enough to make headlines specific enough to show it wasn't just about greed. The discovery phase was brutal for the department. Marcus's team, led by his fiercest civil rights litigators, subpoenaed 5 years of Officer Miller's stop-and-frisk data. What they found was a smoking gun, or rather an entire arsenal. Miller had a habit. Over 4 years, 85% of his suspicious person stops involved black men. In 90% of those cases, no contraband was found and no charges were filed. The stops were harassment, plain and simple. Even worse, there were 3 previous complaints against Miller for similar conduct stops where he had been rude, aggressive, and lacked probable cause. All 3 had been dismissed by Internal Affairs as unsubstantiated. The video footage from the lobby of Sterling Heights Tower was leaked to the press. It wasn't leaked by Marcus, he played by the rules, but by a concerned citizen who had recorded it on their phone. The video went viral overnight. The image of the dignified, gray-haired Marcus Thorne being shoved and handcuffed while calmly citing the law became a symbol of the national conversation on policing. "He's the managing partner," a commentator on a primetime news show shouted, pointing at the screen. "If they can do this to him, imagine what they do to a guy working the night shift at a warehouse. This isn't about one bad apple, it's about a rotten orchard." The city's attorneys knew they were dead in the water. They called a meeting with Marcus. They wanted to settle. They offered $500,000. Marcus laughed at them. They came back with $1.5 million. Marcus declined. "It's not about the money," Marcus told them across the long mahogany table in his conference room. "It's about Miller. He goes, he turns in his badge, and he never works in law enforcement again. That's the condition." The police union fought back, of course. They argued that Miller had made a good-faith mistake. But the data from discovery was too damning. The pattern of racial profiling was undeniable. The city manager, looking at the polling numbers and the potential for civil unrest, finally stepped in. He ordered the city attorneys to meet Marcus's demands. 6 months after the incident, the settlement was finalized. The city of Chicago agreed to pay $2.8 million to Marcus Thorne. But the money was the least significant part of the victory. As part of the agreement, Officer Kyle Miller was terminated for cause, citing conduct unbecoming violation of civil rights and filing a false report. The termination was permanent. His certification was revoked, meaning he could not just move to the next town over and be a cop there. Marcus stood in his office, looking out the window at the same street corner where it had all begun. He held the settlement check in his hand. He hadn't kept a dime of it. He had already set up a scholarship fund for minority law students and a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford representation. He thought about Miller. The last he had heard, the former officer was working construction in a different state, unable to find security work because a simple Google search of his name brought up the video of him arresting a managing partner. Justice had been served in a way. But as Marcus watched the people on the sidewalk below, people of all colors, rushing to work, unaware of the invisible lines they might be crossing, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. He realized that the only reason he had survived that encounter with his dignity and his life intact was because of his suit, his education, and his status. If he had been 20 years younger, dressed in a hoodie or working a blue-collar job that day, could have ended very differently. He could have been another statistic, another name on a placard at a protest. The system had worked for him because he was part of the system. and that was a terrifying realization. Marcus placed the check on his desk and turned back to his computer. There was work to do, there were laws to change. The incident was over, but the fight was far from finished. This story scares me. It scares me because Marcus Thorne did everything right. He was calm, he was successful, he was compliant, and he was still treated like a criminal because of how he looked. It makes you wonder if a managing partner of a law firm isn't safe from bias who is. It's easy to cheer for the $2.8 million settlement. But ask yourself this: what is the price of your dignity? How much would someone have to pay you to be humiliated in front of your colleagues and stripped of your rights? I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think the punishment for Officer Miller was enough? Or should the supervisors who ignored his previous behavior also have been fired? Let's talk about it below. And if you believe in justice for everyone, not just the wealthy, share this story. Let's make sure people understand what's really at stake. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.